Thanks for tuning in. Ham Talk Live will be on the air shortly. Please stand by. Thanks for tuning in. Ham Talk Live will be on the air shortly. Please stand by. This episode of Ham Talk Live is brought to you by Tower Electronics. For cables, connectors, and more, call 920-435-2973 or visit pl-259.com. And by the Ham Station. Get your new radio or antenna by calling 800-729-4373 or go to hamstation.com.
It's Ham Radio.
Good evening, everyone. It's time for Ham Talk Live. It's episode number 81. Some upgrades to the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting and their 75th anniversary celebration, recorded live on Thursday, September 14th, 2017. I'm your host, Neil Rapp, WB9VPG. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Ham Talk Live. Tonight we're joined by Gary West, K8DEV, and Jay Adrick, K8CJY, from the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting in Westchester, Ohio, and we will take your calls in just a few minutes. On Ham Talk Live last week, Bobby Graves was here, KB5HAV, to talk about the Hurricane WatchNet, and Lloyd Colston, KC5FM, from the Voice over IP Hurricane Net, and talked about the status of their nets. And a lot of that health and welfare traffic is still passing around on some of the nets. And so if you missed out on the information on the hurricane nets, you can tune us in at hamtalklive.com, or you can check out one of our podcast versions on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, TuneIn, SoundCloud, and we're also over on YouTube. Do have two announcements here before we take our break and then talk to Gary and Jay tonight. Nathan, N7NAN, wants to share a special event station W7NTV. Will be operating from the National Tribal Emergency Management Conference at the Tai Chi Palace Casino and Resort in Lemoore, California, September 18th through the 22nd. They'll be on 20 and 40 meters, and they'll post frequencies and times on their Facebook page. Post your call sign, date, time, and frequency you made contact on the Facebook page. That's the NTARA, National Tribal Amateur Radio Association. So if you get a chance, get on the air and do that. And one other announcement, we want to give a shout out to Gail, the mother of Marty, KC1 Chicken with Fries, and his sister, Emma, who both passed their license exams this week. So congratulations and welcome to Ham Radio. And just really glad to see that happened here recently. So get your questions ready to go about the Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting. We'll be talking to Gary and Jay. The telephone number when we get to that point is 812-NET-HAM1. That's 812-638-4261. Or you can Skype us at Ham Talk Live or tweet us at Ham Talk Live. And we're going to talk to them first, so don't call just yet, but that's how you will call us, and we'll give you a chance to call in and ask some questions with Gary and Jay right after this word from the Ham Station right here on Ham Talk Live. This episode of Ham Talk Live is brought to you by the Ham Station. For over 37 years, the Ham Station has sold new and used radios, antennas, accessories, and equipment to hams everywhere. Give Dan or Jeff a call at 800-729-4373 or order online at hamstation.com. Ham Station carries all the major brands like ICOM, Yaesu, and Kenwood, and they have a wide selection of radio scanners, MFJ accessories, Heil sound products, amplifiers by Mirage and Ameritron, Cushcraft antennas, and more. Easy online ordering is at hamstation.com or call 1-800-729-4373 to place an order and talk it over with the experts. The Ham Station, proud to sponsor this episode of Ham Talk Live.
Coming to you live from the glass enclosed Faraday box. Here's Neil Rapp with more Ham Talk Live.
Welcome back to Ham Talk Live, the Ham Station. You know, September is Buy Your Husband a Ham Radio Month. I saw on Twitter. And if you saw it on Twitter, it has to be true, right? So, you know, all you gotta do is just drop a little hint and the phone number for the Ham Station. It's 800-729-4373. And you know, just mention, you know, a ICOM 7300 or a TS 990 Kenwood would make a real nice present, you know. So they can do that, or go to hamstation.com. Maybe you just leave the page up. Maybe that'll work. Well, thanks to the Ham Station for helping us out, pay part of the bills on the show, and make sure you listen to us every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time right here at hamtalklive.com. Our guest tonight are Gary West, K8DEV. Was born and grew up in rural Ohio and came to Cincinnati in 1964 to attend the University of Cincinnati, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial Management. Gary and his wife Dee Dee have been married for 49 years and lived in the Cincinnati area that entire time. And he is now retired. He was the co-owner of GW Associates, that did consulting, packaging brokers, and manufacturers representatives. And during his career, he held various management positions at Kroger Company, and was also employed at Procter & Gamble, WONE Radio, and WUBE Radio. And currently, Gary is on the board of the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting and the Gray History of Wireless Museum. He's an advanced class amateur radio operator and licensed in 1961. And also with us tonight is Jay Adrick, K8CJY. He's been active in ham radio since 61. He's a 51-plus year veteran of the broadcast industry. In 2013, he retired from the Harris Corporation as their vice president of broadcast technology, but continues as a consultant in the industry for digital television spectrum issues, and some of those repacks where they're moving some of the channels around. He was awarded the Television Engineering Achievement Award by the NAB and a fellow of the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, and IEEE and SBE as well. Jay serves as a board member of the Voice of America National Museum of Broadcasting. So, guys, welcome back to the show. It's been a while.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, now that you've got a big gala event coming up here in a little over a week, and the 75th anniversary of the Voice of America is coming up, and you got a big celebration there in Westchester, Ohio, on the north suburbs, I guess we'll say, of Cincinnati. And the big celebration is coming up next Saturday on the 23rd of September. So, Gary, why don't you tell us about the big party?
Well, we're looking forward to having a great time, Neil. It's a dinner and dance party that's a fundraiser for the museum, and it's going to be very exciting because longtime journalist and entertainer Nick Clooney will be our MC and will lead the gala. And for those of us in Cincinnati, we know Nick as a longtime anchor here on one of the TV stations. He was also an anchor at a station out in Los Angeles for many years, and also was a host on AMC, which I believe was American Movie Classics cable TV channel. And if I'm wrong, correct me.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay. But to the rest of the world, he's better known, I guess, as Rosemary Clooney's brother or George Clooney's dad. So it's really going to be great to have him there because he has quite a knowledge of broadcasting. He's quite a reader and writer and a student of history, and has a tremendous knowledge of how the VOA was involved in helping shape our democratic way of life here in America. But also Carmen de Leon and the new Studio Big Band will play music selections from the days of live radio broadcasting, and that'll be real interesting, I think. The museum also plans to offer some special one-of-a-kind items for bid during the evening. But the main thing that's going to be exciting, other than all the stuff I've talked about before, is we're opening a new exhibit on radio entrepreneur Powel Crosley, and Jay has a real thorough knowledge of Powell.
Yeah, well, that's a great deal, and Jay, let's talk about that here in just a second. But Gary, before we do that, I want to mention too that your club station does have a special event station planned for the day of the gala, right? Yes.
We do plan to operate starting mid-morning, probably around 9 o'clock, and be on the air up until just before the event begins at 6 o'clock. Don't know for sure what frequencies will operate. With conditions the way they are, we'll probably have to pick spots. So keep your ears peeled for us, and hopefully somebody will spot us so you can have a little don't have too much trouble finding us.
Yeah, okay, so listen for that call sign. It's WC8VOA, so it should be an easy one to pick out on the bands, but they'll be on there. So, yeah, let's go to Jay, and I was there over Hamvention weekend and was amazed at all the stuff you've added to the museum, and now there's this new Powel Crosley exhibit, and so tell us a little history on Powel Crosley. I know there's a good book out there too. I've seen it. I wish I had time to sit down and read it. But tell us about Powel Crosley and a little sneak peek into the exhibit that's going to open up next week.
Okay, very good, Neil. Well, Powell was a very interesting gentleman in his era. If he were evaluated by today's standards, people would say that he was ADHD. The guy was going in 20 directions at all times. Started out as an entrepreneur at a very young age. His dad was a well-established lawyer here in Cincinnati, and he wanted Powell to go to law school, but Powell had, I think, a semester or two of law school at the University of Cincinnati and decided that was not for him. The thing that really interested him when he was quite young were automobiles, which were just coming into their own. And Powell started with the idea that eventually he wanted to be an automobile manufacturer, and he was much later in life. But he wanted to be a manufacturer, but he started small. He came up with an invention that would put a liner inside of the tires of the day that helped prevent flats. He also developed a radiator cap with a flag holder that was popular during World War I. Powell had a brother, Lewis, who became his business partner. And he had some ups and downs in business. He also got into a business that was woodworking that made cabinets for Victrolas. And in the early 20s, around 1921, Powell's son, who at that time was about, I think, 10 or 12 years old, was really interested in this new thing called radio. Not so much broadcast radio, but radio in general, because there were very few broadcast stations on the air. There were a couple of experimental stations, but it was mostly amateur communications. And he tried to get his dad to buy a radio receiver, and they went out to Cincinnati and shopped around and found that the average radio receiver was about $130 in 1920 dollars, which was big money at that time. And he figured there was a better way to do it, a cheaper way to do it. So he contacted the electrical engineering department at the University of Cincinnati and hooked up with a student, a fellow by the name of Dorman Israel. And with Dorman, he was able to come up with an inexpensive radio receiver. But he also realized that if you were going to market radio receivers, you had to have something to listen to. And at the time, there were only 2 or 3 stations that were on the air, but they were on the air at sporadic times. The programming wasn't very good. And it was not something that would drive people to want to necessarily have a receiver. So he, at that point in time, commercial radio was just coming around, but he started out actually with an amateur radio call, 8CR. And he had Dorman build a small transmitter that was an AM transmitter that he set up in the living room of his home, and he played music. He had a piano that could be played for live music, but one of his favorites was the Song of India. And the Song of India was a popular tune at the time. He had a 78 disc that he played on a crank-up Victrola, and he was fascinated by the fact that he could, with this 50-watt station, be heard in quite a few locations around the Cincinnati area by those who actually had receivers. And he realized that there was a future in this thing that was coming about at that time called broadcasting. So he moved the station from his living room to the plant where he was building the woodworking materials, the Victrola cabinets, and began to build radios for sale, but also applied for a license, and in March of 1922 was granted the call WLW. Crosley increased the power to 500 watts with a homemade transmitter that didn't work very well, and eventually that was replaced by a Western Electric transmitter, and Powell sort of dreamed in 10 dB steps. So his next step was to move to 5,000 watts, and for the first time in broadcast history, the transmitter was located away from the studio. It was located out in Harrison, Ohio, and that happened in 1925. So Powell believed in good programming. He hired musicians and talent, and began building up the station. By the late 20s, the station was at 5,000 watts, and he acquired a second station, WSAI, which was owned by the U.S. Playing Card Company. So Powell acquired the transmitter site out at Mason that WSAI had built as part of the deal, and he moved WLW out to Mason alongside of WSAI, and again, thinking in 10 dB steps, he went to 50,000 watts in 1928. And at that point, he needed, since he was heard in many areas far off from Cincinnati needed better programming. So he built a new factory for his radio business and also his appliance business that he had started. In that building, he also set up the WLW studios, which were magnificent studios for their time, and again had major improvements in programming. He was part of the NBC radio network around 1928. The network was beginning, and he added WLW to the network. But unlike a lot of stations that only took the network in as a source, he was originating programming for the network as well as carrying some of the network programs. Well, again, thinking in 10 dB steps, in 1932, he had a new antenna system built for the station, the Blawnox Tower that still stands today in Mason. He also ordered a 500 kilowatt amplifier from RCA, who actually was a program manager for the project. The majority of the works of the transmitter were built by the folks at Westinghouse and at General Electric. And that transmitter went on the air in 1934, 500 kilowatts. It was the highest power commercial AM station in the country. And by then, he was, in essence, a network all to his own. His talent was there at the time was some of the top people in the industry. Red Skelton was one of the entertainers. Durwood Kirby, Red Barber was a sportscaster because at this point in time he had acquired the Cincinnati Reds. So he was quite an entrepreneur. But radio wasn't his only business. I mentioned appliances, and he got into the business of manufacturing things like refrigerators. He developed some very unusual appliances and home devices. He started a shortwave station, WLWO, focused on Latin America. He had some products that were for areas that typically didn't have reliable electricity. So for example, he developed a thing called the Icy Ball, which was looked like a copper barbell with a handle on it. And the Icy Ball, you could heat one end of the Icy Ball, put the other end in an insulated compartment, like a refrigeration compartment, and it would keep food cold. It was based on a chemical reaction with a solution that was similar to ammonia. Ammonia was one of the chemicals in it, and it was used for refrigeration, again, in areas where electricity wasn't prevalent at the time. So Powell was very, very diversified, building radios, building appliances, running a radio network and a broadcasting operation, owning the Cincinnati Reds with Crosley Field at the time. So he was quite an entrepreneur. And all this time in the background was his brother Lewis, who would sort of hold Powell's feet to the ground. Powell, was always running off to develop new ideas, new things that would generate money. But Lewis was the one who made sure they made money. And they were very successful. I think we have a break coming up, Neil.
Yeah, we do. We're just about time for the break, and then we'll take people's calls. So let's kind of fast forward here to the exhibit, if we can, real quickly, and talk a little bit about this exhibit that's going to open up and that's going to celebrate all of Crosley's feats here.
So Powell really has never been recognized via a collection or a museum. He there are two facilities, one in Sarasota, which was his home down there, and also the home in suburban Cincinnati called Pinecroft. But both of those are now what I would call meeting and social gathering places for wedding receptions, etc. But there's really nothing to celebrate all the successes of Crosley. He did leave a legacy of buildings throughout Cincinnati, and one of them, the home of WCET and WVXU, WGUC, the other, the Crosley Y. So we've pulled together many of the inventions that Powell created. We're going to have, as I mentioned earlier, that he was in the automobile business with a factory over in Richmond, Indiana. And we have a couple of cars that will be on exhibit. We have the Shelvador refrigerator. The Shelvador, the concept of shelves inside the door. There's a very interesting story we can tell later on that one. The icy ball, he has a thing that was called an Exervac. Powell was a bit follically challenged, and he thought by putting this helmet on his head with a vacuum that he might be able to stimulate growth of hair. So he had several different versions of this thing called the Exervac. He had another very unique device, way ahead of its time, called Rito. Rito was, think of it as a one-way fax machine, receive-only fax machine, that would tune in to WLW overnight and would deliver on a thermo type paper, thermofax type paper. It would deliver your newspaper. So WLW overnight broadcast analog data that was the local newspaper. There were two other stations, WGN and WOR, that also were equipped and broadcast the Rito news that Crosley developed and marketed. So we have all of those things that are coming together in this collection, will be on display, and we'll be able to tell the story of Powel Crosley and the great things that he has done in the world of commercial consumer products. But he also did some very unique things to help the country. We all know about the VOA, the Voice of America, the Bethany station that was built started in 1942, was dedicated in 1944, but actually went on the air in late 43. But there's one other thing that few people know about, and that's called the proximity fuse. In the early days of World War II, many of the artillery shells, or the shells that were fired by the naval ships, did not hit their mark. They would, the average strike was about 1 in 10. And it was because the shells got close but never actually struck the target. And therefore, when they exploded, they didn't do much damage. What Powell's engineers developed was think of it as a small nose cone that went on the front end of a projectile. And in that was a battery-powered transmitter and receiver that acted sort of like radar. And when the shell got close to a target, particularly, for example, shooting at aircraft, where you have a moving target to begin with, and the shell would just whiz right on by, the proximity fuse would sense that it was near an object and fire the shell. So the success rate on hits went from a mere 10% to well over 30% on every shell that was fired by the ships. So the proximity fuse was a real secret. It was invented and built for the Naval Department, Navy Department at the factory. And it's the reason, by the way, that WLW in 1942 was moved out of the factory to 9th and Elm in downtown Cincinnati to what became Crosley Square, because the Navy didn't want any of those singers and banjo players and entertainers hanging around a factory where top secret work was going on. So we happen to have a proximity fuse in the collection.
Very nice. Well, we do need to take a break here, but we'll come back. We've also got some news about some new expanded hours of the museum, and we'll talk about that, and we'll take your calls in just a minute when we come back after this word from Tower Electronics right here on Ham Talk Live. This episode of Ham Talk Live is brought to you in part by Tower Electronics. Tower Electronics has been the Ham's dime store since 1978. When you need connectors, mobile and handheld antennas, cables, or adapters, visit Scott or Jill at a Hamfest near you. Or you can order online at pl-259.com or call 920-435-2973. Stock up on those supplies like PL259 and N connectors, SMA adapters, audio cables, soldering supplies, mobile antennas, and ham sticks. Their silver-plated N connectors are even used on the International Space Station. Tower Electronics carries MFJ, Comet, Daiwa, OPEC, Workman, and Ham Pro products. And don't miss their 0% off sale going on now. Tower Electronics, online at pl-259.com, proud to sponsor this episode of Ham Talk Live.
Oh, yeah. You're talking ham radio, baby. You're listening to Ham Talk Live with Neil Rapp.
Join the conversation. Call us on voice with Skype at Ham Talk Live or give us a call at 812-NET-HAM1. That's 812-638-4261. Now, here's more Ham Talk Live.
And thanks to Scott and Jill at Tower Electronics for sponsoring the show to help bring you Ham Talk Live. This weekend, they're in Peoria, Illinois at the Superfest this weekend. And then you can catch them in Cedarburg, Wisconsin, September 23rd, and in Belton, Texas on October 7th. Or you can give them a call at 920-435-2973 or visit their website at pl-259.com. Tell them you heard it on Ham Talk Live and tell them you want to take advantage of the 0% off sale going on right now. So give them a call. Well, it's time for your calls. If you have a question about the Voice of America Museum or the new Powel Crosley exhibit, give us a call at 812-NET-HAM1. That's 812-638-4261. Or you can Skype us or tweet us at Ham Talk Live. So give us a call right now. We do have time to take a couple of calls this evening. So and we've got so much stuff to talk about with the museum and the history of Crosley and everything that we can't cram it all in 45 minutes. So we're going to try to finish up with some of the high points here. So give us a call. 812-NET-HAM1 is the number. And while we're waiting on that, we do have some news about some changes to the hours of the museum. So Gary, why don't you take that one and tell us about the good news?
Well, Neil, as you probably know, and anyone that has tried to visit the museum knows, we've only been open one Saturday a month. And that's still the situation we're in. But beginning in October, on October 7th, we do plan to be open every Saturday and Sunday. And we hope to continue to do that until next summer. And if we've got the arms and legs and things are working out, hopefully we will be open 2 or 3 days during the week as well. So, I know a lot of folks have said, geez, we'd like to come see you, but it's awfully tough to get it scheduled. So we're trying to make that a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's great news. And I know for me it was hard to make sure that I had that scheduled in. And fortunately with the summers I was able to do it a few times. But that's great news that they'll be open every Saturday and Sunday starting in October. So that's great news. Well, if you have a question, give us a call. 812-638-4261 is the telephone number to call. And give us a call, and we can talk about some stuff. And we've got the WC8 VOA station that's also been getting some upgrades. We may talk about that here in a minute. And the Crosley exhibit's going to be open. That's the new thing, and Jay told us all about that and how WLW, the big one, came about, and his work too with building the Voice of America station there in Mason. So give us a call. 812-NET-HAM1 is the number. And until then, Gary, why don't you tell us a little bit about the club station? I know you've got a new repeater up. You've got some new rigs. You've got a 7300 now, and an SDR that you can operate remotely, and all kinds of stuff. So tell us about some of the upgrades to WC8 VOA at the museum.
Yeah, well, we're very excited, Neil, and I know you've been there and operated. It's really different when you're there. It's kind of like being DX, So we're looking for folks to come and operate this equipment. But one of the things that has happened over the last year or so, we have had to reconfigure the antennas to accommodate a new handicap accessible building entrance and a parking area. And as a matter of fact, the event that we're holding is going to be outside with a tent on the new parking area. But with the reconfiguration, we now have two tri-banders and an R7 vertical and a fan dipole for 80, 40, and 17, and a 75-meter dipole, 40-meter dipole, 160-meter dipole, 6-meter beam, and 2-meter beam. So we've got most of the bands covered from HF up to VHF. And we now have 7 operating positions in the WC8 VOA station. And the newest one is the IC 7300 that you mentioned, and we've got an ALS 1306 amp that goes with that. And then we've also got an IC 9100 with an ALS 600 amp and a TS 590S with a Henry 2K classic amp for you guys that are into classic tube amps. We've got an FT 450 digital rig, a beginner's rig, and then we've got an IC 746 Pro, which we use for CW and VHF and UHF. And then we do have a couple of vintage rigs. We have an FT101E that was donated to us by Yaesu. It was the last FT101 to come off of the service line in California before they shut that down. So it's really great to hear the audio out of that rig, too. And then we also have a TS520 rig and some others we're going to rotate through there. But we also have something that you can kind of get involved in from home. Andy Crew, ND8E, or ND8D, I'm sorry, has installed an SDR radio at VOA, and you can actually access that radio through the WC8VOA.org website. Get in there and you can see where to click to get into the receiver. And it's kind of interesting. We had Chris and Jocelyn, Chris KD8YVJ and Jocelyn KD8VRX took part in the Youth DX adventure to Costa Rica, and they actually used the SDR to monitor their signals out of Costa Rica to see how propagation was to the Midwest. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing to do. And the other thing that we've got new that's right there at VOA, we've got a low profile 440 megahertz repeater we've put on the air, and there's quite a bit of information about that on the website as well if anyone is interested. We've had the 2-meter repeater on 145.39 for several years, but this is something we put on the air to kind of play with some new digital things. Both of our repeaters are Fusion digital repeaters, but we haven't done as much as we thought we would when we got them, so we're trying to change that. And I don't know, Neil, what else did you want to hear about?
Oh, I think we hit everything there. And you mentioned the website, wc8voa.org, and then you've got voamuseum.org for the museum for information about that. And over on the VOA side, I know you can sign up for an email list. I'm on that and get some information from the museum from time to time and what's happening there. So check that out, and you can try out the SDR from there and listen to some stuff from the Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting. So if you want to call us, you're just about out of time, so give us a call. It's 812-638-4261, 812-NET-HAM1 for the calls. We just have a couple of minutes remaining, so give us a call. But did want to throw those websites in there. And again, the big celebration is September 23rd, Saturday, September 23rd, and that starts at 6 o'clock in the evening. So the special event station will be on during the day leading up to that. And you can check all of that out on the air. So be looking in the spots for WC8VOA. All right. Well, yeah, we're just down to the last 2 minutes here. So anything else, Jay, that you want to throw in there?
Sure. There is one other thing that Gary didn't mention on the club station, and that is that we're looking at developing a rhombic antenna for the club. The 24 original antennas that were located out at the VOA were all rhombics, and we are planning a rhombic antenna that would replicate the type of antenna structure that the VOA operated with. This antenna would be northeast-southwest pattern, and there's actually starting, I guess, tomorrow, Gary, tomorrow and Saturday, they're going to be erecting a test version of the antenna and doing some testing and checking out the effectiveness of the antenna.
You still there, Gary?
Yes.
Yep.
I'm sorry. You pretty well covered it, Jay. You know, that is what we're planning on doing. And hopefully, after we get a little more experience with this, we'll be able to put up a permanent antenna. But we're looking at it as, you know, we're developing a display, but we're also looking at it as a real good learning activity for people in the club. And one of the things I did want to mention, Neil, with these expanded hours, we're looking for volunteers. We need people to be docents and people to help us in the ham station, come in and operate the ham station and welcome people in. So anybody that's in the Cincinnati area, Cincinnati-Dayton area, or if you'd like to spend a weekend in Cincinnati every now and then, we'd love to have you sign up, and you can get information on that on the voamuseum.org website as well.
Yeah, I'm going to need some volunteers to take care of that. So that'd be great. I may have to take you up on that at some point too. So we'll maybe in the summer we'll see how that goes. Well, guys, we're out of time again. But thanks for coming on and sharing with us about everything happening next weekend and all the things that are being added to the museum.
It's been a pleasure, Neil.
Thank you, Neil.
Yep, always good to see you guys and talk with you and appreciate you coming on the show. So that is a wrap for this week's edition of Ham Talk Live. Again, thanks to Gary West, K8DEV, and Jay Adrick, K8CJY, and everybody out there in cyberspace for listening in. And next Thursday night at 9 p.m., Eastern Time. Scott Westerman, W9WSW, will be here to talk about ham radio public relations and the Great Lakes HamCon up in Michigan. So for a list of all of our upcoming guests, just go over to hamtalklive.com. So for now, this is Neil Rapp, WB9VPG, saying 7-3 and 7-5, and may the good DX be yours.
Well, you came right back to my suitcase.